Unfrighteningly Bad Ghost Stories, Volume 1. Written and read by Shan McFadden. Chapter 1. Granny Smith and the Sinister Thump. Old Granny Smith lived in a spooky old house at the very top of a steep, dark hill. One stormy night, while Granny lay huddled beneath her covers in the darkness, she heard a sound that chilled her fragile heart. The sound was neither wind nor rain nor thunder, but something altogether more foreign and sinister, and it sounded like this. Thump, 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 thump. Granny sat up in her bed with the sheets pulled up to her chin and called out in a dry whisper, "Mr. Whiskers, is that you?" She stared out into the oppressive darkness, and for a long moment there was no sound at all, save the faint drumming of rain falling on the roof. With a piercing meow, a large black cat sprang up onto the bed. Its wide yellow eyes glowed softly in the dim gloom.
"Oh, Mr. Whiskers,"
sighed Granny with relief.
"It was only you. I was worried that awful thumping might be—"
Thump, 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 thump. Granny gasped and clutched tightly to Mr. Whiskers. She climbed soundlessly out of bed and, with the cat still cradled in her arms, crept cautiously across the floor. Peeking her head slowly out into the hallway, she was met with an impenetrable wall of black that was severed only by the occasional dull gleam of blue light, pulsing in through the window from sheets of distant lightning. She inched toward the stairs, holding her breath, and then heard thump, 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 thump. With a screech, the cat leapt from her arms and disappeared into the murky shadows. Granny peered down the long staircase toward the front door and then placed a frail and trembling hand on the banister. She guardedly made her descent, step by uneasy step. Each footfall evoked a timid squeak from the stairs. Lightning flashed closer this time, and for a moment Granny swore that she could see a figure out there, something on the front step, lurking in the mournful darkness. Something awful, something that was thump, 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 thump. The dreadful sound repeated. Her pulse pounding in her ears, Granny called out in a fluttering voice, "Go away!" The door shook with a thump, 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 thump. She reached the bottom step and, in a state of full-blown panic, lifted her quivering hand toward the doorknob and wailed, "I said leave me alone!" The call came back. Thump, 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 thump. Her eyes wild with terror, Granny turned the handle, threw open the door, and shrieked, "Whoever you are, stop that horrible thumping and leave me alone!" In the doorway loomed the shadowy figure of a rain-soaked pizza delivery boy named Jimmy. In one hand he held a stack of flat rectangular boxes. He wiped his runny nose on his sleeve, then he said, "Here's your 5 anchovy pizzas, ma'am. That'll be $65.23. Her mind still reeling in shock, Granny shouted, "I didn't order any pizzas. There's been some kind of a mistake." Jimmy's shoulders slumped, and he whined, "But I just carried all these pizzas up the steep, dark hill. Oh, can't you at least pay me a tip?" Granny yelled, "I'm not made of money. Get lost." Then she slammed the door and went back to bed. When she awoke in the morning and opened the front door, Granny was shocked to find a stack of pizza boxes sitting on the front step. As it turned out, Jimmy, the delivery boy, being so disappointed at not receiving a tip, had forgotten to take the pizzas with him when he left. So Granny and Mr. Whiskers ate leftover anchovy pizza every day for a week, except on Wednesday, when they boiled some cabbage instead. Ha 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 ha. Chapter 2. Revenge of the Two-Headed Man-Eating Cow. Once there was a very naughty boy named Carlos, whose favorite thing in all the world was to terrify other children with spooky and macabre ghost stories. But of all the children he liked to frighten, the one he loved to scare the most was his own little sister, Maria. One day, Carlos invited Maria to join him on a camping trip to the nearby woods. When Maria protested that the woods were far too scary for a sleepover, Carlos conceded. He offered instead that they camp in the farmer's field across from their house. Maria reluctantly agreed, and by nightfall they had pitched their tent in the abandoned pasture and were huddled in their sleeping bags with a flashlight tucked between them. As the moon rose slowly in the sky, Maria heard the quiet moo of a distant cow.
"What was that?"
she said in a panic.
"I thought this field was empty. Are there cows here? Will they hurt us?"
"Relax," said Carlos. "It's probably at the other end of the field. And besides, cows are harmless. Unless it was the two-headed man-eating cow."
"The two-headed what?"
Maria whimpered, pulling up her sleeping bag so that only her eyes were uncovered. Carlos stifled a giggle as he began his treacherous tale. "Oh, it's just a story that some of the kids like to tell. Apparently a few years ago on a farm not too far from here, a cow was born that had two heads. The farmer decided he'd keep it as a tourist attraction. He figured he'd make a lot of money by charging people admission to see it. So he fed it and cared for it, and it grew up big and strong. But no one ever came to see the two-headed cow. So one morning the farmer decided that he'd just take it to the slaughterhouse and be rid of it. But when he went to the barn, he found that it was empty. He looked all over the farm, all over the fields, every place, trying to find out where the two-headed cow had gone. But he had no luck. It had just disappeared. So that night he went to bed, but just as he turned off the light, he heard a quiet moo. He went to the window, but he couldn't see anything. Then he heard the moo again, but it was closer this time. He grabbed his coat and his flashlight, and he stomped outside to the barn. The moo came again, but it was much, much closer, so loud that he swore it was right in front of him. He stepped into the barn, turned on his flashlight, and found that the barn was still empty.
"And then what happened?"
said Maria through chattering teeth. Carlos said the barn door slammed shut behind him, and when the farmer turned around, he saw the two-headed cow staring at him. All four eyes were filled with the rage of betrayal. It had figured out that the farmer was going to sell it for meat and took its revenge by eating him first. Maria gave a small cry and then pulled the sleeping bag up over her head. "And you know what the scariest part is?" Carlos snickered.
"What?"
came the muffled reply. "No one knows what happened to the two-headed man-eating cow. It was never seen again. For all we know, it could be right here, right now, right in this very field." As if on cue, a loud moo broke the silence outside of the tent. Maria shouted in terror, and even Carlos jumped before collapsing in laughter. "It's just a normal cow, Maria," giggled Carlos. "There's no such thing as a two-headed man-eating cow. I was just trying to scare you. Come on out of your sleeping bag and I'll show you." Reluctantly, a sobbing Maria emerged from her sleeping bag, sniffling and wiping at her eyes. Feeling guilty for his cruel prank, Carlos took her by the hand and led her outside. The moon hung brightly in the sky, providing enough light for them to see the dark figure of a cow that was grazing nearby. Shrouded in shadows, its head was down as it chewed loudly on the long grass. "See," said Carlos, "it's just a regular one-headed cow." At that very moment, the cow raised its head, or should I say, heads, because there, silhouetted against the moon, was not a one, but a two-headed cow, with its four-eyed gaze fixed directly upon them. Carlos screamed, and it was the type of noise you might hear a lady opera singer make when she was shattering a crystal glass with her voice. It was the kind of sound that might only be heard by neighborhood dogs and spotted bats. He let go of his sister's hand, and with a speed fueled by absolute terror, he ran all the way home and hid in his bedroom closet. Some time later, Carlos heard Maria's voice from behind the closet door. With a tone of great satisfaction, she told him that there was nothing at all to be afraid of, because it hadn't been a two-headed cow at all. It had actually been two one-headed cows, with one standing directly behind the other. Maria asked Carlos to come out of hiding, but he refused, not because he was still afraid, but rather because he was terribly, terribly embarrassed. Because you see, dear listeners, Carlos, the boy who took great delight in scaring others, had actually been so afraid that he had peed in his pants. Chapter 3. The Three Cakes of Edgar Delacorte. On a rainy autumn morning, Edgar Delacorte awoke to find 3 cakes laid out on a small table next to his bed. The first cake was a pristine white, and was covered in whipped cream and lightly toasted coconut. The second cake was ruby red, in a cherry glaze and topped with sliced strawberries. And the third was a deep cocoa brown, decorated with shavings of rich dark chocolate. Next to the cake sat a simple note with a message scrawled in black pen. The note read, "Here lie 3 cakes. One brings great wealth, another great love, but the third brings death. Know this, you may choose to reject all 3, and if you do, no harm will befall you. But take a single bite of any one cake, and the fates will decree that you must eat all 3. Break this oath, and everything you love will wither before your eyes. Choose wisely, or do not choose at all." Shocked and bewildered, Delacorte eyed the cakes suspiciously. He didn't know where they'd come from or why they were there, but he knew this: he wanted nothing, absolutely nothing to do with those mysterious cakes. So he left them on the table and went on about his day. But later that afternoon he found that the roof of his humble little cottage had begun to leak quite badly. And having no money to fund the repairs, he sat on his bed and eyed the 3 cakes. Was it actually possible that one would bring him great wealth? And if so, which one? "The white cake is bright like a diamond," said Edgar. And he took a knife and cut himself a small slice. The cake tasted like honey and cream, and with each bite he found himself wanting more and more. And sooner rather than later he found that the first cake was gone. He had eaten it all. He sat on his bed, his eyes wide and fearful, his heart full of dread, and said, "Oh no, but what have I done?" And a knock fell upon his door, and then another, and when he answered it, Edgar found the caller to be a man. The man was a solicitor. He informed Edgar that he was the lucky recipient of a secret inheritance from an uncle that he had never even met. And so it was that Edgar Delacorte found great wealth. The next day, as he sat in his cottage with a new dry roof above his head and bags of money heaped around him, Edgar Delacorte sighed and said, "Well, yes, it's a fine thing to be rich, but 'twould be finer still to have someone to share it with." And then it was that he found himself once again sitting on his bed and staring at the cakes, of which there were now only 2. "The red cake looks like blood," said Edgar with a grimace, but then exclaimed, No, red, like a Valentine's heart." So he cut a small slice, and it tasted like cherries and candy apples. And he took another bite, and then another, and before he could stop, the plate was empty, and the second cake was gone. "I've doomed myself," he gasped with regret. "I've taken my own life." Then a knock fell upon his door, and then another, and when he answered, he found at his door a lovely young woman. She had become lost while traveling and had stopped to ask for directions, but with one look she fell in love with Edgar and he with her. They ran off together and laughed and danced and found a preacher who would marry them, and by the end of the day they were man and wife. When they returned from their honeymoon, Edgar's new wife said, "Oh, look, someone's left us a delicious chocolate cake as a wedding gift." And she fetched 2 plates and some cutlery. But Edgar's face dropped, and he said with a moan, "Don't eat it, my love. It's my burden to bear." And so he explained the story of the 3 mysterious cakes, and of the great wealth and great love they had brought. He explained that the 3rd would bring him death, and that if he refused to eat it, everything he loved would wither and die, and that the thing he loved most was her. "I see," said the wife. "And so I must eat it," said Edgar sadly as he reached for a slice. "Wait," said the wife. "Let me get it for you." And she took the cake and the plates away and disappeared into the kitchen. A moment later she returned with a plate that appeared at first to be empty. But upon closer inspection Edgar found that it contained the smallest, most delicate crumb of dark chocolate. "But what is this?" asked Edgar in bewilderment. The wife smiled softly and said, "This cake is far too rich. You'd get a stomachache if you ate an entire piece, so I'll just give you a little bit here and a little bit there, and eventually you'll get through it." So Edgar ate the tiny crumb, and it tasted so delicious that he asked for more. But the wife refused, and instead she wrapped the cake in brown paper and placed it in the cupboard. And every day she gave Edgar a tiny crumb, and every day he ate it and asked for more, and every day she refused. And because it was a magic cake, it never spoiled, and it lasted for years and years and years. Eventually, the wife gave Edgar the very last crumb on the plate. And as soon as it passed through his lips, Edgar Delacorte fell to the ground, dead. But by this time he was 97 years old and had lived a full and happy life, so it really didn't matter. The end. Written and read by Shan McFadden. Music by Audionautics.com. So I thought these stories were supposed to be scary. They're not. Okay. I think I may have been miscast. Right. Okay, because they all end kind of stupidly. And that's intentional? Okay. Okay. I need to talk to my agent. Thank you. Have a good day.